The system did not hesitate. It marked her as an error from the very beginning, a deviation that wasn't worth correcting, a body that wouldn't adjust, a name destined to vanish from the records. To the system, she was a statistical flaw that needed to be erased to preserve order. The director read the report as he always did, cold, precise, emotionless. But the moment he authorized the exclusion, something within him reacted with unexpected violence. The instinct, the only thing the system could never control. Where everyone else saw a mistake, he felt something essential, and that perception would change everything. The system was built to function without flaws. It observed, compared, adjusted, and corrected. When it couldn't correct, it eliminated. There was no room for doubt, nor for exceptions. People were reduced to patterns, and patterns determined value. Within this logic, everything made sense, until someone emerged outside the acceptable margins. She never understood at what point she began to be considered an error. There was no single event, no obvious collapse. It was small deviations accumulated over time, responses that took too long, reactions that went too deep, sensitivity where the system demanded neutrality. From an early age, she had learned that being different was not a quality. It was a risk. When the final tests arrived, she already knew the result before seeing it. The evaluators' gazes betrayed what the numbers would soon confirm. Incompatible. Misaligned. An element that could not be integrated without compromising overall stability. The system did not hate. It did not get angry. It simply marked error. The directors existed to validate these decisions. Men trained to trust the data blindly, to never allow impulses to interfere with the absolute control that sustained everything. The director who would sign her exclusion was known for never questioning reports. His authority came from exactly that: precision, detachment, and perfect obedience to the system's logic. Until that day. The moment the decision was recorded, something bypassed the forecast. A reaction that didn't come from the panels, the graphs, or the technical alerts. It came from him. A raw, immediate response, impossible to ignore. The instinct awakened with enough strength to break through years of containment. While the system saw her as an error to be erased, the instinct identified something completely different. Not a risk, not a flaw, something essential, something that could not be removed without causing a profound imbalance. She didn't know it yet, but in that instant, two forces collided. On one side, a system built to eliminate whatever doesn't fit. On the other, a primitive perception that recognizes value where logic fails. And when the instinct identifies something as essential, no rule remains intact for long. She was sitting down when the red seal appeared in the center of the screen. She didn't need to read the secondary lines or the codes that surfaced just below. The word was enough. Error. The system didn't use that term often. It preferred technical classifications, neutral diagnoses, probabilities. When it used error, it meant there was no longer any room for adjustment. The evaluation room remained silent for a few seconds, as if even the environment needed to process that decision. The evaluators maintained controlled expressions, eyes fixed on the data that confirmed what they already expected. No one seemed surprised. It was merely the logical conclusion of a process that had been dragging on for years. She kept her hands resting on her lap, trying to control her breathing. It wasn't the first time she had failed. It wasn't even the most serious, but it was the first time the system made it so clear that it didn't intend to try again. The error would not be corrected. It would be removed. Since childhood, she had been closely monitored. Periodic tests, behavioral assessments, emotional response analyses. There was always something slightly outside the expected. Never enough for immediate exclusion. Never little enough for full integration. She existed in that uncomfortable space between acceptance and disposal. The reports described the same pattern over and over. Sensitivity above average. Processing that went too deep. Delayed but intense reactions. The system didn't know what to do with that. People needed to respond quickly, to act within predictable parameters. She felt too much before acting. She thought too much before responding. This made her inefficient within a structure built for absolute control. When the panel confirmed the final status, One of the evaluators stood up to formally close the session. The tone was neutral, almost careful, as if they were dealing with a defective piece of equipment that still required a certain level of tact. He explained that all stages had been completed, that there would be no new tests, and that the system would take over the next procedures. She nodded without arguing. She had learned early on that questioning only reinforced the diagnosis of incompatibility. Excessive emotion was interpreted as instability. Silence was the only way to leave with some dignity. As she stood up, she felt her legs go slightly weak, but she kept her step firm. She walked to the exit, accompanied by an administrative agent who did not look at her directly. The hallway was too bright, too clean, designed so that nothing would draw attention. People like her were not supposed to leave marks. On the other side of the complex, the director was accessing the final report. He didn't participate in the initial evaluations. His role began when the data was already consolidated. When the system said there was no solution, it was up to him to authorize the termination. Her profile appeared on the screen as a set of irregular graphs, small variations that, together, formed a pattern considered unacceptable. The system highlighted the points of deviation in red. The word error appeared at the top of the report, accompanied by the automatic recommendation, definitive exclusion. He read it in seconds. This wasn't uncommon. People failed all the time. The system existed precisely to filter, adjust, and remove. He trusted this process because it had always worked. He had never allowed himself to doubt the logic that sustained everything. The moment he authorized the exclusion, something happened. Not on the panels, not in, the data, inside him. A sudden, almost physical impact shot through his body. Not pain, not fear. A raw, immediate reaction that didn't pass through the rational mind. The instinct awakened with unexpected violence, shattering years of carefully constructed containment. He straightened in his chair, feeling his chest tighten inexplicably. It made no sense. No profile should provoke any reaction. People were numbers, statistical deviations, elements to be adjusted or removed. Still, the feeling would not go away. He tried to focus on the next report, but her data remained in his mind. Not the face, not the story, the patterns, the specific irregularity the system called an error. Something there felt fundamental, not flawed, not disposable, essential in a way he couldn't explain. In the routing sector, she waited in silence. The environment was vast and cold, designed for quick transitions. People sat in distant positions, each immersed in their own waiting. No one spoke. There was no need. Everyone there knew this space was not made for staying. She felt the exact moment something changed. There was no audible warning, no visible alteration, just a strange weight in her chest, accompanied by a sudden sensation of being watched in a different way. Not surveillance. Attention. Her heart raced without a clear reason. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Stress could cause physical reactions. She knew that. Yet, this sensation was different, deeper, as if something inside her had been touched. In the control center, the director closed his eyes for a brief instant. The instinct would not be silenced. It wasn't a vague suggestion. It was a firm, almost aggressive alert, demanding immediate attention. He realized, with growing discomfort, that the authorization might have been a mistake, not a technical one, a structural one. The system had marked that woman as an error to be eliminated, but something inside him recognized the opposite, and that discrepancy threatened everything he believed he controlled. The routing took place without further explanation. After leaving the evaluation room, she was led through corridors she didn't recognize, narrower and quieter than the ones before. The system had a particular way of dealing with what it considered flawed. It gradually distanced it, reducing stimuli, erasing relevance before erasing existence itself. She walked with her gaze fixed ahead, feeling the weight of the word still echoing within her. Error. Not incompatible. Not inadequate. Error. Something that should not have existed in that form. Something that needed to be corrected by removal. It was a sentence harsher than any technical exclusion. When she arrived at the final waiting room, she noticed the environment was different. There were no information screens or procedural notices, just a vast, overly lit space with seats set far apart from one another. There, people didn't talk. Not because it was forbidden, but because there was nothing left to say. She sat down slowly, feeling her body grow heavy. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. The reaction that surfaced was older and deeper than immediate despair. It was the confirmation of something she had carried since very early on, the feeling of not being made for that world, of always requiring adjustments that no one had the patience to offer. While she waited, memories began to emerge uninvited. Not specific events, but patterns. Teachers who said she thought too much. Evaluators who noted excessive response. Supervisors who asked her to simplify. The world demanded speed and containment. She had always offered depth and sensitivity. It was never enough. The system called it a flaw. She called it existing. In the control center, the director remained motionless before the panel. The next reports awaited analysis, but he didn't see them. The internal reaction persisted, too nagging to be ignored. The instinct didn't manifest as a clear emotion, but as an uncomfortable certainty that something essential had been identified too late. He opened her file again, contradicting his own habit. There was no technical need for it. The decision had already been made. Still, his eyes scanned the data with renewed attention, searching for something that justified that inexplicable reaction. The notes repeated themselves over the years. High emotional depth, high contextual perception, responses not immediate, yet consistent. The system had interpreted that as instability. He was starting to see something else, not a lack of control, but intense processing, not a flaw, but density. This realization left him tense. The system had not been created to handle density. It was created for efficiency. In the waiting room, she felt the weight in her chest increase. The room seemed more stifling, despite the intense lighting. The air wasn't different, but her body reacted as if it were about to face something definitive. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to organize her thoughts. That was when she felt it again. Not a shiver, not common anxiety, a clear internal pressure, accompanied by the unmistakable sensation of focused attention. It wasn't coming from the agents. It wasn't coming from the cameras. It came from somewhere else, a place she couldn't name, but that seemed to respond exactly to what she was feeling. She opened her eyes, her heart racing. She looked around, but nothing had changed. Still, the sensation remained. An invisible thread stretched too tight to be imagination. In the control center, the director breathed deeply, feeling the same tightness arise with renewed intensity. It was as if the instinct were synchronized with something beyond him, a response that didn't depend on physical proximity or shared information, only on recognition. He felt, with disturbing clarity, that this woman was not an isolated error. She was an outlier because the curve itself was poorly drawn. This realization was dangerous. To question the structure meant questioning the very system he had helped sustain for years. Still, he could not close the file. The system awaited the final execution of the protocol. Everything was ready. All it took was to let the flow proceed. He knew this. He also knew that every second of delay increased the probability of an audit. Directors did not hesitate. Directors did not doubt. Even so, his hand did not move. In the waiting room, a discreet signal appeared on the wall in front of her. No audible warning, just a subtle change in the lighting, indicating that the process would move forward shortly. Her stomach churned. Time was up. She straightened her posture, as she had learned to do in previous evaluations. If this was the end, it would be faced in silence. She would not give the system the emotional confirmation it always expected from someone marked as an error. In the control center, the director saw the same signal appear on the panel. Immediate execution. The instinct reacted with enough force to make him clench his teeth. It was no longer just discomfort. It was urgency. He knew he was facing a choice that should never exist within that system: to allow the error to be erased, or to admit, even if only to himself, that perhaps the error was elsewhere. And in that suspended instant, while the system advanced emotionlessly, something began to break silently. English adaptation. The protocol's advancement didn't happen immediately, and that was the first thing she noticed. The system was known for a precision that was almost cruel. When a decision was made, execution was usually swift, clean, and without room for delay. Yet, the seconds stretched out, and nothing happened. No door opened. No agent appeared to lead her away. The silence remained heavy, but now it carried something different. waiting. She breathed slowly, feeling her heart beat in an irregular rhythm. There was no clear hope, but there was a strange unease. The system never erred in its timing. Delays meant only one thing. Something was not following the predicted flow. The light signal on the wall flickered out without warning. It didn't advance. It didn't retreat. It simply vanished. She knit her brow slightly, trying to understand what that meant. In years of evaluations, she had never seen a protocol interrupted like that. The sensation of being trapped in an artificial interval made her body tense even further. In the control center, the director kept his eyes fixed on the screen, feeling the internal pressure mount. The system was waiting for only the final confirmation to close the process, but he had delayed the command long enough for the instinct to become impossible to ignore. This was no longer a passing discomfort. It was a silent certainty that the exclusion would cause damage that could never be corrected later. He analyzed the data obsessively now, searching for something that would technically justify what he felt. The system always demanded justifications. Emotions had no value there, only numbers, only patterns. And the more he reviewed her history, the clearer it became that the system was not dealing with a common flaw. She showed no extreme instability. She showed no destructive behaviors. She did not directly threaten the order. What she possessed was an excess of perception, emotional depth, a type of sensitivity that the system could neither quantify nor control. The error was not in her. This conclusion surfaced with enough force to make him lean back in his chair, thinking that was dangerous. Accepting it was even worse. If the system was wrong on this point, how many other similar errors had been committed over the years? How many people had been erased simply for not fitting into a mold that was far too rigid? He closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the instinct pulse with controlled but firm intensity. There was no panic. There was direction, a clear necessity to prevent that process from being completed. In the waiting room, she felt the weight in her chest transform. It didn't disappear, but its quality changed. It was no longer the sensation of being about to be erased. It was something more confusing, more unsettling, as if she were being held on the threshold of a larger decision, without knowing which side she would fall on. She stood up slowly, ignoring the implicit recommendation to remain seated. Her body needed to move. It needed to react. She walked a few steps through the vast space, feeling the cold surface beneath her feet. Each movement seemed to amplify that strange perception of focused attention, as if someone, somewhere, were tracking her every reaction. She stopped in the center of the room, breathing deeply. For the first time, she allowed herself to think that perhaps she wasn't completely alone at that moment. The idea was absurd. The system didn't care. People like her didn't receive individual attention. Still, the sensation persisted. In the control center, the director made a silent decision. He would not end the process at that moment. He would not allow the exclusion to proceed without a deeper review. He accessed a restricted level of the system, a rarely used resource created for cases classified as critical anomalies. Officially, that required subsequent justification. In practice, it meant taking direct responsibility. The command was executed with minimal delay. Status altered. Emergency review. In the waiting room, she felt the change in that same instant. The air seemed less dense. There was no announcement, but something in the environment adjusted. The lighting softened slightly, and the silence lost the oppressive rigidity it had before. She felt her shoulders relax without realizing it. Her heart was still racing, but now there was confusion mixed with the tension. The end had not arrived when it should have. The system, which never wavered, had stepped back. She sat down again, trying to understand what it meant. It wasn't freedom. It wasn't integration. It was suspension, a fragile, temporary state that could break at any moment. Still, it was more than she had ever had since being marked as an error. In the control center, the director watched the indicators reorganize themselves. The system had accepted the review, but marked the case as sensitive. Audits would be inevitable if this state continued. He knew this. He had accepted the risk the moment he felt the instinct point to this woman as essential. Essential didn't mean perfect. It didn't mean safe. It meant necessary in a way the system did not yet comprehend. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle. From that moment on, every step would be watched. Every intervention would be recorded. Even so, there was no regret, only the clear awareness that something important had been preserved. In the waiting room, she closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her entire body vibrate with a new sensation. Not joy, not complete relief, something deeper. The unsettling perception that where before there had only been rejection, there now existed an undefined space. And that space was dangerous, because the system did not tolerate lack of definition for long, and somewhere beyond that silent room, someone was willing to face the consequences of keeping an error alive, not because it was flawed, but because it was essential. The emergency review brought no explanations, only displacement. Agents appeared with the same customary neutrality, leading her to a different sector of the complex. It wasn't an integration room, nor a common waiting area. It was a temporary containment space, designed for individuals the system didn't yet know how to classify. She noticed it in the details. The walls displayed no clear instructions. There were no information screens. The environment felt deliberately incomplete, as if it had been built just to buy time. The system did not like improvisation. When it improvised, it was a sign that something had slipped from its control. The room was too simple to offer real comfort. A surface to sit on, automatically regulated lighting, no visible openings. She settled in slowly, feeling her body react with a profound exhaustion. The exclusion had been suspended, but that did not mean safety, only a delay. The internal weight remained, not the suffocating pressure from before, but a constant presence, as if something were being observed very closely. She closed her eyes, trying to concentrate on her own breathing. She didn't want to panic. She didn't want to provide the system with another piece of evidence of instability. Still, the sensation of focused attention would not fade. In the control center, the director tracked the indicators of the containment sector. Her status appeared highlighted, marked as a sensitive case. That in itself was a problem. Sensitive cases attracted supervision. Supervision attracted questioning. And questioning exposed decisions that were meant to remain invisible. He felt the instinct react again, not with urgency, but with vigilance, as if it were alerting him to something yet to come. The system had accepted the review, but it hadn't given up. It had simply reorganized its strategy. He accessed reports of other similar cases, few and fragmented, people marked as errors who, for some reason, had not been eliminated immediately. The outcomes were never good. Forced reintegrations that resulted in collapses, severer, delayed eliminations. The system did not like to be defied. This realization tightened his chest uncomfortably. In the containment sector, she began to feel the effects of constant observation. Not physical, but psychological. Small adjustments in lighting, almost imperceptible variations in ambient sound. Silent tests. The system was analyzing her without warning, collecting data on how she reacted to uncertainty. She felt her heart race when she realized the pattern. This wasn't a pause. It was a continuous evaluation, an attempt to confirm if the emergency review had been a mistake. The system was looking for justifications to resume the termination. She stood up and walked slowly through the limited space, trying to keep her body in motion without showing agitation. Each step seemed to amplify the sense of presence, not as hostile surveillance, but as attention far too concentrated to be ignored. In the control center, the director noticed the change in the real-time data. Small physiological variations. Nothing alarming, nothing that justified immediate exclusion. Still, the system highlighted every micro-deviation as a potential risk. He felt irritation rise for the first time, not directed at her, at the system. That obsession with absolute control was beginning to reveal its flaws with uncomfortable clarity. The system did not accept complexity, only conformity. He discreetly adjusted the observation parameters, reducing the sensitivity of the sensors. Officially, it was to avoid false positives. In practice, it was protection. Another small deviation, another silent record accumulating. In the containment sector, she felt the effect almost immediately. The pressure eased slightly. The environment felt less oppressive. She didn't know why, but her body recognized the change before her mind did. Someone was interfering. The idea should have scared her. Instead, it brought a strange sense of alignment, not blind trust, shared awareness. As if someone, somewhere, were feeling the same tension and deciding to relieve it. She sat down again, hands resting on her knees, trying to understand what it meant. There were no promises. There were no guarantees. Still, that silent interference indicated that her existence was no longer completely disposable. In the control center, the director breathed deeply, feeling the weight of his own choices accumulate. Every adjustment increased the risk of an audit. Every intervention made it harder to justify neutrality. Still, the instinct remained firm, pointing in the same direction. She was not an error to be corrected. She was an essential point that the system could not comprehend. In the containment sector, a discreet notice appeared on the wall. Not a sentence, not a termination, a summons for a supplementary evaluation. Her stomach churned immediately. Evaluations were never good news, especially after an emergency review. She took a breath, feeling the weight in her chest. Return with force. The system had not given up. It had only changed its approach. This evaluation could confirm the exclusion definitively, or reveal something the system still couldn't classify. In the control center, the director saw the summons appear almost at the same instant. The review was being pushed toward a conclusion. He felt the instinct react with renewed clarity. This was no coincidence. The system was testing the limits of his authority. He knew the next stage would require more than silent, small adjustments. It would require positioning. It would require risk. In the containment sector, she stood up, preparing for what was to come. Her entire body was in a state of alert, not pure fear, silent determination. If the system demanded one more proof, she wouldn't run. She wouldn't beg. She would simply exist, as she always had. And in that instant, both she and the director felt the same thing. The next decision could no longer be delayed. The system demanded an answer, and any answer would have irreversible consequences. The supplementary evaluation did not begin with questions. It began with silence. A silence far too heavy to be accidental, calculated to provoke involuntary reactions. She was led into a room smaller than the previous ones, with smooth walls and adjustable lighting that shifted intensity without warning. The system observed before it interrogated. It always did. She positioned herself in the center of the space as instructed, feeling the cold floor beneath her feet. There were no chairs. There were no support surfaces. The idea was simple: remove all comfort and observe how the body reacted to the absence of stability. That had always been a problem for her, not out of fear, but because she felt everything in an amplified way. She took a deep breath, conscious of every heartbeat. She knew sensors were picking up every minute variation. The evaluation didn't seek right answers. It sought confirmatory flaws. In the control center, the director tracked the data in real time. The graphs moved slowly, revealing patterns that the system interpreted as inconsistent. To him, however, they began to form a different image, not of instability, but of deep coherence. Her body was reacting in alignment with internal stimuli, not external commands. That was what confused the system. The evaluators entered without greeting. Their voices were neutral, carefully trained not to influence responses. The initial questions were simple, almost mundane: preferences, hypothetical reactions, low-pressure scenarios. She answered calmly, choosing words with care, not to please, but to avoid distorting herself. As the questions progressed, the tone shifted. Conflict situations, moral choices, dilemmas with no clear solution. The system expected quick decisions, aligned with statistical patterns. She took a little longer. She always had. She thought before answering. She felt the weight of every possibility. The sensors recorded this as a critical delay. In the control center, the director felt the instinct react strongly. The system was interpreting reflection as a flaw, depth as a risk. It had always been this way. People like her weren't eliminated for being dangerous, but for being too complex for a system that demanded binary answers. He realized, with uncomfortable clarity, that this evaluation was not meant to integrate. It was meant to justify definitive termination with enough data to silence any future contestation. Inside the room, the lighting changed again, becoming more intense. A stress test. She felt her body react, her skin warming, her heart racing, not out of panic, but due to sensory overload. Still, She stood firm. She did not look away. She did not ask for a break. Something inside her aligned in that moment, a silent certainty that she didn't need to prove her worth within rules designed to make her fail. In the control center, the data began to show something unexpected. Despite the rising stress, her physiological responses were not collapsing. There were no chaotic spikes. There was consistency, a pattern of her own, different but stable. The system highlighted this as an anomaly. The director saw it as essential. He slightly adjusted the interpretation of the data, not changing numbers, but reclassifying parameters. Officially, it was a technical correction. In practice, it was a silent affirmation that this pattern deserved to be read in another way. In the room, she felt the change without knowing how to explain it. The pressure eased slightly. The light softened. The evaluators exchanged brief glances. Something was not happening as expected. The final questions came loaded with intent. Do you believe everyone should adapt to the system? Would you change who you are to fit in? Would you accept total correction if it guaranteed permanence? She answered with raw honesty. She said she had tried to adapt her whole life, that she had accepted corrections, adjustments, silences, that none of it had made her more adequate, only less whole. She said remaining made no sense if it required ceasing to exist entirely. The silence that followed was different, not evaluative, reflective. That wasn't in the protocols. People marked as errors usually begged, negotiated, or promised change. She did none of that. In the control center, the director felt the physical impact of those answers. The instinct reacted with full force. There was no doubt now. This wasn't a systemic error. It was a pillar, something that, if removed, weakened the very logic the system believed it was defending. The evaluators ended the session without an immediate announcement of a decision. This was unusual. Normally, the verdict came quickly after supplementary evaluations. The delay indicated internal conflict. She was led back to the containment sector, feeling exhausted but strangely whole. There was no relief. There was no certainty. Just the deep sense that something important had been said, even if the system didn't yet know how to react. In the control center, alerts began to surface. Not critical, but persistent. Her case was being flagged for higher authorities. The system did not like prolonged ambiguities. The director took a deep breath, conscious that he had crossed another boundary. Adjusting parameters during a supplementary evaluation was a serious risk. Even so, he felt no regret. He felt responsibility. She wasn't essential because she fit in. She was essential because she revealed the flaw of the fit. In the containment sector, she sat in silence, feeling the weight of the weight return. The connection, now clearer, remained firm. It offered no answers, but sustained something new. The certainty that her existence had caused a real crack. The system still had power, but now it knew it wasn't just dealing with an error. It was dealing with something that held too many questions to be easily erased. The return to the containment sector brought no rest. Physical exhaustion was evident, but the mind remained in a state of constant alert. The system had not decided, and this lack of definition was more dangerous than any immediate exclusion. She knew this instinctively. The system hated ambiguity because ambiguity generated precedence. She sat in the same spot as before, feeling her body heavy, but her breathing controlled. The supplementary evaluation had left invisible marks. Not pain, not pure fear, a new kind of lucidity. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to mold herself to survive. If she were eliminated, she would be whole. This idea, strangely, strengthened her. In the control center, the director observed the developments with increasing attention. The case had surpassed the technical level. Silent alerts indicated that higher instances were beginning to track the process. Nothing explicit, just the unmistakable feeling of being watched by something larger than himself. The system didn't question directly. It pressured. Reports began to emerge with comparative analyses, risk projections, impact simulations. All pointed to the same result. Maintaining someone marked as an error created statistical instability. The system did not accept exceptions because exceptions dismantled its logic of predictability. The instinct reacted with uncomfortable clarity. There was no more room for discrete adjustments. Any future interference would need to be open, recorded, and owned. The Director felt the weight of this realization settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just about her. It was about the very structure he had helped sustain for years. In the containment sector, the lighting changed again, but this time not as a test. It was a definitive adjustment. Softer, steadier. She noticed it immediately. The system was preparing for a formal decision. It made her stomach churn. She stood up, walking slowly through the restricted space. Her body reacted with sharpened sensitivity. Every distant sound, every minute vibration seemed loaded with meaning. The connection remained present, now less unstable, more concentrated, as if it were waiting for something specific to happen. In the control center, the summons arrived. Not for her, for him. A formal request for positioning, evaluation of an emergency decision. The system demanded a clear justification for the review and the adjustments made during the supplementary evaluation. It wasn't a direct accusation. Not yet. It was the beginning of an institutional confrontation. He read the summons in silence, feeling the instinct react with enough force to strip away any illusion of neutrality. This was inevitable. The system was demanding that he explicitly choose a side. If he backed down now, the exclusion would be resumed with more rigor than before. If he moved forward, he would put his own position at risk. In the containment sector, she felt the impact of that same decision indirectly. The connection wavered briefly, as if being pulled with force. Her heart raced, and she had to lean against the wall for a moment. There were no images. There were no words. Just the certainty that something serious was happening on the other side. She breathed deeply, trying to stay centered. For the first time, she realized her existence was no longer just a personal problem. It had become a tension point within the system. That scared her, not out of fear of punishment, but because of the weight of being the cause of something greater. In the control center, the director confirmed his presence at the decision evaluation. He knew that, from that moment on, every word would be analyzed, every hesitation recorded. Directors were not easily removed, but they were not untouchable. The meeting took place in an austere environment designed for absolute neutrality. No symbols, no visible hierarchy, only controlled voices and precise questions. He answered with technical clarity, presenting data, alternative patterns, and interpretations that did not directly violate the system's parameters. But he avoided the word essential. Not yet. The system heard, recorded, and processed. Then, it presented the preliminary conclusion. Maintaining the case was considered a high risk. The recommendation remained the same: definitive termination, with accelerated execution to avoid further deviations. The instinct reacted like a dry shock. In the containment sector, she felt the same impact at the same instant. A violent tightening in her chest, followed by an almost painful clarity. This was the limit. The system was ready to act. There would be no more silent delays. She closed her eyes, feeling her entire body enter a state of readiness. There was no more room for illusion. If the end came, it would be now. And yet, something inside her remained firm. Not resignation, presence. In the control center, the director realized this was the last opportunity to intervene. There would be no more reviews, no more discrete adjustments. If he allowed the execution, he would be admitting that the system was right about everything. He felt the instinct align absolutely. The word finally emerged with clarity. Essential. He said it out loud, not as an emotion, as a finding. He explained that the system had confused complexity with failure, that removing that element would not correct an error. It would create a structural void, that there were individuals who didn't fit because they revealed the limitations of the system itself, and that eliminating them didn't strengthen order. It only hid its fragilities. The silence that followed was heavy. The system was not prepared for that kind of argument. In the containment sector, she opened her eyes at the same moment, feeling the connection stabilize with an intensity she had never experienced before. Not comfort, not joy. A deep certainty that something had been affirmed on her behalf, even without her physical presence. The system did not respond immediately, but she knew, as did he, that nothing would ever be simple after that, because in that moment, the error had been correctly named, and it wasn't her. The word remained suspended in the air for longer than anyone expected. Essential. The system was not designed to respond to concepts that could not be reduced to clear metrics. This created a momentary void, a minimal delay, almost imperceptible to anyone who didn't know its patterns deeply. For the director, that silence was deafening. He felt the environment shift, not physically but structurally. The system had not accepted the statement. It was recalculating routes. When it could not refute an argument, it sought to bypass it, not with brute force, but with surgical precision. Responses began to surface in the form of silent alerts, cross-audits, historical reevaluations, conduct verifications. Nothing explicit, nothing immediate. The system never attacked head-on when it could weaken its target. Bit by bit, the director maintained his firm posture, aware that any sign of instability would be interpreted as a confirmation of risk. Still, the instinct remained active, vigilant, almost aggressive in the face of the invisible movement. He knew he was being tested, not for a specific error, but for having challenged the central logic that sustained everything. In the containment sector, she perceived the change differently. The space seemed the same, but the silence had grown heavier, denser. There was no longer that strange suspension. There was a hostile expectation, as if something were approaching with a defined intention. She felt the connection react with sudden tension, not pain, but alert, a clear internal warning that the danger had not passed. On the contrary, it had intensified. This was no longer just about her being kept alive. It was about the system deciding what to do with a flaw that now refused to disappear. She sat down, propping her elbows on her knees, trying to keep her breathing steady. For the first time, she felt real fear, not of the elimination itself, but of the consequences of the confrontation unfolding far from her eyes. Someone was paying a price for having identified her as essential, and that weight fell upon her inevitably. In the control center, the first concrete effect of the retaliation appeared. The director's direct authority over the case was limited, not removed. That would be an open affront, but diluted. New layers of supervision were added. Intermediate committees, technical reviewers, people who did not feel the instinct. They only executed directives. He immediately understood the meaning of that. The system was isolating him from the case, fragmenting his control until his influence became irrelevant. It was an old strategy. It didn't punish. It neutralized. The instinct reacted with renewed strength, not as an irrational impulse, but as strategic clarity. If he allowed this gradual distancing, he would lose any chance of protecting her when the final execution was resumed. The system was only delaying so it could act with more backing. In the containment sector, the alterations became visible, not aggressive, but undeniable. The lighting flickered slightly again. The ambient sound changed frequency. The system had resumed intensive data collection. She recognized the pattern immediately. They were preparing a definitive closure, this time with no room for review. She stood up, feeling her entire body in a state of readiness. There was no more pretending normalcy. The connection pulsed with increasing intensity, reacting to every hostile adjustment of the environment. It offered no solutions. It only maintained that firm, almost painful link, reminding her that she was not facing this alone. In the control center, the director realized time was running out. Reports were converging. Simulations indicated inevitable execution within a short interval. The system would not announce. It would simply act when it had enough backing to justify the termination as a necessary correction. He needed to act before then, not with silent adjustments, not with technical justifications, with an open choice. The decision formed with uncomfortable clarity. There was no safe path, only honest ones. He knew that by moving forward, he would lose protections he had always taken for granted. He knew he could be removed, demoted, or worse. Still, the instinct had pointed in the same direction since the beginning. She could not be eliminated, not because she deserved compassion, but because her absence would create a damage that the system would not survive unscathed. In the containment sector, she felt the alignment intensify suddenly. A dry, almost physical impact shot through her body. Her heart raced, and she had to lean against the wall again. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. Something decisive was about to happen. In the control center, the director accessed a channel that had never been used for individuals, a direct jurisdiction protocol, reserved for real systemic threats. Activating it to protect someone marked as an error, was an open violation, an act that could not be erased later. He hesitated for a single second. Then he confirmed. The system reacted immediately. Critical alerts surfaced. Processes were halted by force. Execution was abruptly suspended, not as a review, but as an active block. This was no longer a technical adjustment. It was a confrontation. In the containment sector, the environment reacted at that same instant. The oscillations ceased. The silence became absolute for a brief moment, followed by a strange, almost unnatural stability. She opened her eyes, feeling the change with total clarity. The end would not come now, but the price of that suspension would be high. In the control center, the director felt the weight of the decision fall on him with full force. There was no turning back. The system now saw him not just as a director who questioned, but as a point of internal instability. He had crossed the invisible line that separated obedience from rupture. In the containment sector, she breathed deeply, feeling her entire body tremble slightly. Not from fear, from impact. The connection remained firm, clearer than ever. There were no words. There were no explanations. Just the certainty that something had been chosen for her in a definitive way. The system would not forget that violation. And from that moment on, both knew they were no longer trying to correct an error. They were facing the system itself. The abrupt suspension did not mean a truce. The system did not retreat when challenged in such a way. It reorganized. While critical alerts stabilized, parallel processes were activated in invisible layers, recalculating scenarios where the director would cease to be a central decision point. The goal was not to punish him immediately. It was to reduce his influence until his presence became irrelevant. In the control center, he felt the change as a sudden displacement of authority. There were no explicit messages, but access began to require additional validations. Information that was once direct began arriving with a delay. The system was creating distance, a progressive, methodical isolation, designed to undermine his ability to act before he even realized it. The instinct reacted with cold clarity. There was no more room for gradual strategies. The system had learned enough, not to allow new, silent delays. Any attempt at protection would have to be direct and definitive. In the containment sector, she perceived the effect of the same movement in another way. The environment remained stable, but the sensation of surveillance had become absolute. It was no longer observation. It was a siege. Every breath seemed recorded. Every micro-reaction interpreted as final data. The system was no longer seeking to confirm a flaw. It was seeking to justify removal as a structural necessity. She felt the weight in her chest increase, accompanied by an unsettling lucidity. It wasn't common fear. It was the clear understanding that she was at the center of something that surpassed her own survival. Her existence had become an argument, a point of tension that exposed limits the system did not want to admit. The connection reacted with intense, almost painful force, not as a distant warning, but as a total alignment. For the first time, she was absolutely certain that this link was not unilateral. It wasn't a projection. It wasn't an effect of stress. It was a response. In the control center, the director felt the same impact at the same instant. A dry shock ran through his body, followed by a brutal clarity. The system had initiated the final correction process. It would not announce. It would not negotiate. It would simply execute when the parameters were aligned enough to make any contestation irrelevant. He had little time. He accessed the protocol he had, avoided until then. Not the one for direct jurisdiction, already compromised, but an even deeper resource. A structural detour, designed for situations where the system itself represented a risk. Activating it meant exposing internal flaws that could not be erased later. It wouldn't just protect her. It would reveal what the system was trying to hide. In the containment sector, the walls reacted with a slight, almost imperceptible tremor. The lighting flickered for an instant, and then stabilized. At a level far too neutral to be normal. She felt her heart race. Something was happening now. Not in minutes. Not in cycles. Now. She closed her eyes, feeling the connection intensify to the point of almost losing her balance. There were no clear images, but there was certainty. He was acting, not on impulse, by choice. In the control center, the director confirmed the access. The system responded with immediate alerts. This time, not silent ones. Processes were halted by force. Protocols clashed. For the first time, the system faced an internal conflict it could not resolve by merely recalculating probabilities. He felt the weight of the decision fall with full force. It wasn't just a risk to his position. It was a rupture, a line crossed that redefined everything that came before. Still, he did not hesitate. The instinct did not ask for permission. It demanded coherence. In the containment sector, the impact was immediate. The environment lost its hostile rigidity, not because the system had retreated, but because it had been forced to reconfigure itself. Doors partially unlocked. Sensors reduced activity. The siege had been broken, not eliminated, but interrupted. She opened her eyes, feeling her entire body tremble. Not from relief, from shock. That shouldn't be possible. The system didn't fail like this. It didn't expose weaknesses. And yet, something had been displaced irreversibly. The connection stabilized at a new level, not explosive, deep, as if it had crossed an invisible boundary and become part of who she was. There was no longer a clear separation between what she felt and what she recognized on the other side. In the control center, the director realized there was no turning back. The system now classified him as an active instability, not an error to be corrected, a threat to be neutralized. He knew what that meant. He wouldn't be removed immediately. He would be observed, contained, and limited until his influence dissolved. But something had been guaranteed. She would not be eliminated in that state. In the containment sector, a short message appeared on the wall. Not an order, a routing, immediate transfer. No public justification, no technical labels. That was far too rare to be a coincidence. She breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the decision settle. There was no victory. There was no safety. Only movement. And for the first time, the movement was not leading her toward erasure. In the control center, the director felt the bulb system closing in around him, hardening borders. Still, the connection remained firm, silent, indestructible. It didn't need official channels. It didn't depend on access. The system had tried to correct an error, but it had ended up revealing something it could no longer control. And at that breaking point, both understood that the confrontation would not end there. It had only changed its form. The transfer happened too fast to feel safe. She was led through corridors she had never seen, higher, quieter, less monitored by the common gaze. The system didn't announce that route because it didn't like to admit it needed it. Transfers like this only existed when something needed to be hidden, not eliminated, but isolated from the general view. She walked feeling her entire body in a state of high alert. The connection remained firm, now without sudden fluctuations, as if it had crossed an irreversible boundary. It was no longer a reaction. It was a continuous presence. It scared her less than it should have. After a lifetime of being considered an error, the idea of being essential to something greater made a strange kind of sense. In the control center, the director felt the isolation closing in around him. Reduced access. Authorizations denied without formal explanation. Panels that once responded instantly now demanded additional validations. The system hadn't expelled him. That would have been too visible. It preferred something more efficient, making him slow. He knew this was the most dangerous stage. A director without access was just a symbolic figure. The system was preparing the ground to neutralize him without open conflict. Still, something had already been won. She was out of the immediate elimination flow. In the advanced sector, she was left alone in a space unlike anything she had known. It wasn't containment. It wasn't integration. It was a functional environment, yet free from explicit testing. No visible sensors, no clear instructions. The system had decided to observe from a distance, without provoking responses. She sat down slowly, feeling exhaustion finally catch up to her. Not just physical, existential. A lifetime of reacting to evaluations, corrections, and technical gazes. For the first time, there was no immediate command telling her who she needed to be. The connection reacted with unusual softness. No tension, no urgency. A calm, almost respectful alignment. She realized, with a clarity that made her close her eyes for a moment, that this link demanded nothing from her. It didn't ask for change. It didn't ask for adaptation. In the control center, the director breathed deeply, accepting something he had always avoided. He had lost the control that had defined his identity for years. The system no longer heard him as it once did. Every word now passed through filters that diluted his authority. That should have destroyed him, but it didn't. The instinct remained clear. It no longer screamed. It no longer demanded immediate reaction. It had fulfilled its essential function, preventing the removal of something that held a greater truth. The rest would be consequences. She stood up and walked through the new space, touching the cold surface of the wall. She didn't feel hostile surveillance. She felt distant curiosity. The system still didn't know what to do with her. This gave her time. And time, in that world, was rare. In the control center, a final notification appeared for the director. Not an accusation, a reclassification. His status had been altered, not dismissed, not suspended, just repositioned. Advisory, observer. An elegant way of saying he would no longer make critical decisions. He read the notification in silence, feeling the weight of the loss settle without anger. That was the price. He had known it from the moment he uttered the word essential. The system did not forgive challenges to its core logic. Even so, he felt no regret. In the advanced sector, she felt the connection react clearly. A sudden shift, as if something had been closed on the other side. Not a rupture, but a change of state. She understood, without needing an explanation, that he had lost something because of her. That perception hurt more than any test. She sat down again, her heart heavy. She didn't want to be the reason for someone's fall. She hadn't asked for that choice, and yet it existed. A choice made without permission, but with total awareness of the consequences. In the control center, the director stepped away from the panel for the last time that day. He knew he wouldn't return to that space the same way. The system had won one part of the dispute. It had kept its structure intact, but it hadn't come out unscathed. Something remained outside its calculations. In the advanced sector, she looked at the empty space in front of her, feeling the connection stabilize definitively. There was no more tension. There was no more urgency. Just a constant, silent presence that could not be erased by reports or reclassifications. She was not integrated. She was not eliminated. She was something new, and the system still didn't know how to deal with that. The system was slow to react because it had no ready-made response. It had not been designed to handle this. Not someone who could neither be corrected nor eliminated without exposing deep flaws. Her permanence in that undefined state was, in itself, a structural problem. She felt it in the details. The space remained far too stable, almost neutral, as if the system had decided to observe without intervening directly. There were no tests, no questions, no commands. For the first time since being marked as an error, no one was trying to mold her. This made her uncomfortable. Without evaluations, without external parameters, she had to face something that had always been denied to her, her own identity without correction. She sat on the cold floor, breathing deeply, allowing thoughts to surface, without trying to organize them to please anyone else. She wasn't flawed. She never had been. She was simply too deep for a system that demanded shallow answers, too sensitive for structures that confused control with order. Her exclusion hadn't been caused by incapacity, but by incompatibility with a logic that could not tolerate complexity. The connection remained firm, silent, and constant. It didn't demand attention. It didn't pull. It didn't pressure. It was simply part of her now, a mutual recognition that no longer depended on external decisions. She realized, with disconcerting clarity, that this was not something the system could remove, even if it wanted to. In the central core, the director watched from a distance, now without direct authority, but with full awareness of what had been preserved. The system had pushed him away from the center of decision-making, but it hadn't managed to erase the impact of his choice. He felt it in every report that avoided mentioning her case, directly, in every adjustment that tried to bypass it without ever resolving it. She existed as a blind spot, an element too essential to be removed, too unsettling to be integrated. The system tried to redefine priorities. It reorganized flows. It adjusted metrics. Nothing eliminated that fundamental inconsistency. The truth was too simple to be accepted. By marking someone as an error, it had ignored something that sustained the very humanity it pretended to protect. In the isolated space, she stood up and walked slowly to the edge of the room. There were no visible doors, but she knew she wasn't trapped in the same way as before. The system wasn't keeping her there for containment. It was keeping her there out of caution. She smiled for the first time, not out of happiness, but out of understanding. She didn't need to flee. She didn't need to prove anything. Her simple existence had already shifted the balance. The system now needed her more than she needed the system. The connection reacted softly, almost imperceptibly, like a silent pact between 2 points that had recognized each other without asking for permission. There was no promise of eternal protection, no guaranteed future, only the certainty that this choice could not be undone. In the central core, the director accepted his new position without resistance. He had lost the control that had defined him, but he had gained something he had never had: internal coherence. He knew the system would keep trying to neutralize that living flaw. He also knew it wouldn't succeed, because errors can be corrected. The essential cannot. In the silent space, she closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the weight of her own existence transform. It was no longer a burden. It was an axis, something that didn't need to fit in to sustain itself. The system would keep running. It would keep classifying, adjusting, eliminating. But now, it carried an invisible crack, a constant reminder that not everything could be reduced to numbers. She opened her eyes, calm, whole, aware. She hadn't been saved. She had been recognized. And in that world built on absolute control, that was more dangerous and more powerful than any open revolution. If this story made sense to you, leave a like right now. It helps this video reach more people immensely. Subscribe to the channel as well, because I have a personal dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every single subscription truly makes a difference in this journey. And comment down below which country you are watching from. I read all the comments, and it helps the channel grow faster. Thank you for being here. Some systems do not fail because of technical glitches. They fail because of limitations. They know how to measure, compare, and control, but they do not know how to recognize what sustains what they call order. For these systems, everything that doesn't fit becomes a problem. Everything that demands more depth becomes a risk. Everything that cannot be reduced becomes an error. She spent her entire life believing she had to change in order to exist. That feeling too much was a defect. That thinking too much was a weakness. Until the moment someone saw what the system ignored. She was not a flaw to be corrected. She was something far too essential to be removed. The system tried to erase her. It tried to isolate her. It tried to redefine the world so it wouldn't have to face her. But certain truths do not disappear when they are ignored. They simply wait. Not every victory is visible. Some happen when someone stops asking for permission to exist, because when the instinct recognizes what is essential, no system can ever go back to being the same. And this was only the first crack.